Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and introduce John. Many of us know him. He's a great friend to the Master Gardeners. And for those that don't know him, he's a certified arborist, a professor horticulturist, and he's the retired curator with the Chihuahuan Desert Botanical Garden at UTEP. He does so much for us, and we are so very thankful to him for that. Side note, he also started our awesome organization several years ago. So with that, I will turn it over to John. Take it away, John.
All right, thank you, Stella.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak before you. I think Kevin's gonna meet up with you later, and he can let you know a little bit more about the UTEP plant sale and stuff. But Ignacio asked me to talk a little bit about desert plants, some of the native plants in the area, and so I kind of put together a little list of maybe a baker's dozen, a little over a dozen plants that are true natives of the area and that are good to use. But my years here through the different nurseries and stuff, it seems like it's harder and harder to find native plants in the local nurseries, and I guess part of it's just what their demand is. That's what they carry. So it is a little harder to find some of the native plants. So hopefully the plant sale and things like that can give you some opportunity to get some native plants. I know El Paso's water utilities has increased the price of water, so it has gotten higher and higher. So first, I'd like to say, that we want to remind everybody that we are in the Chihuahuan Desert here, and I thought this slide comes out better, on the computer screen than when you blow it up. So, but we are in a desert. You can have parts of town that are very green and everything, but you're still in a desert, and our rainfall is usually less than 10 inches, what helps to define a desert. And the predictions for this year are supposed to be pretty dismal as far as moisture, and so we're going to have another hot, dry year, it looks like. And so again, the use of some of the natives gives you a plant that is a desert plant that's been grown in a desert climate, and it has the ability to adapt to those conditions. And we've talked about some of the different things that native plants have, and this one really came out bad. It looked a lot better earlier, but the area in orange there in the center is the Chihuahuan Desert. It's either the first or the second largest desert in North America, depending on where you use your parameters on the boundaries. But most of the Chihuahuan Desert is in Mexico. About a quarter of it is in the United States, and the other 3/4 or 2/3 are in Mexico. So it's a very large desert. We're in the northern part of the Chihuahuan Desert, which makes us a little bit colder. And so the plant material that grows in our area is more cold hardy, whereas you use some of the plant material from other parts of the Chihuahuan Desert, you'll run into some cold hardiness problems. So we always want to think of us as being in the high desert part of the Chihuahuan Desert. And so a lot of it's kind of a change in paradigm. Well, people will, think of lush gardens, and we all would like to be in the lush garden, but in reality, we're in the Chihuahuan Desert. We're in an area that only receives a minimal amount of water. So we are in a paradigm shift where we need to think more about the lushness being from native plants and not so much from water-loving plants. So some of the plants that we'll talk about today, and some of the plants that be at the plant sale, are plants that use lesser amounts of water, still give you some color and some greenery. So again, it's just making that paradigm shift to thinking more about a desert climate. So what makes up our area, what makes it different? Of course, we have very alkaline soils, typical of a Western soil, and usually some saline or sodic salts in that soil. Again, typical of the area. We don't have very much rainfall, so those salts tend to accumulate and they aren't leached out very much. So we have higher amounts in our soils, and certain plants do well with it and other plants don't do as well with it. Also, we already mentioned the lack of rainfall, about 10 inches. Most of it falls during the monsoon season of late June, July, August, sometimes September. And, if it doesn't fall during that time of the year, usually we aren't going to get it. So us as well as the plants are reliant on that monsoon rain during the late summer, mid to late summer. And since we don't get much rain, our humidity is much drier. So that causes more water loss in plants, and our native plants have adapted through their leaf shape, the color, the size of the plant, all that, have adapted to where they don't lose as much water and they keep the water within the plant. Drought tolerance, we have some plants that have a built-in drought tolerance where they can withstand periods of dryness between rainfall patterns or irrigation patterns. Again, this is partly the plant's makeup. It's morphology and leaves and everything with it. And so it's able to go further. Trees like a mulberry, which is a tree that uses a lot of water, has a very large root system, grows hundreds of feet away from the tree, and it will steal water from everywhere. So it keeps itself going by being able to take water from neighboring properties. From, if you quit watering, your neighbors keep watering, just tell them thank you, because that will give you enough water to keep, maybe that mulberry going. But eventually it requires so much water that you just can't put enough down. And a lot of our older parts of town, you see some of the trees beginning to show signs of dieback and stuff. And that's just where the drought is starting to catch up with the plant. We had a lot of, higher rainfall periods during some of those years, and those plants survived with the help of Mother Nature. And when you're left to maintain that water by yourself, we just can't put enough on to keep some of those plants alive and keep them doing well. So again, we would like to look at plants that come from desert climate. This is one of the acacias that has a very, very small leaf shape to it and stuff. So, its modifications on the plant are built to survive in a very harsh climate that doesn't have much humidity or much rainfall. And so it's able to mine water from large areas and then not lose the water off, keep it within the plant. So it's able to survive much longer through the drought periods. Boy, these photos aren't coming out good at all. I apologize for that. Cactus, of course, have a built-in ability to store water within the plant. Has a very thick skin on it, cuticle, that keeps the moisture within the cactus plant. If you've dug up cactus, moved them much, you notice they don't have much of a root system. It's really pretty small compared to the size of the plant. It's pretty shallow. So they're able to pick up moisture from just off the surface of the soil and a little bit in it, but it's stored more in the plant. So the ribs on some of the cactus help to move the water down to the root area where those roots can pick up the water and again store it within the plant. So the cactus have very good built-in adaptation to keeping moisture in. If you notice, a lot of our native plants have, or desert plants have a silver or light color to them. And that's another adaptation that a lot of desert plants take. So they have small leaf sizes to them, lighter in color, so they reflect a lot of light off, and they just help to keep moisture in the leaves of the plant, in the trunks and the branches where the water's stored. So a lot of our plants will have that nice silver color, and usually silver colored plants will adapt to dry conditions a lot better than plants that have the darker green color to it. So we'll talk about some plants. One that I think is almost a year-round bloomer is Hymenopsis. This one is Angelita daisy. Doesn't get very tall, forms a little mound. The flowers come up, bloom, and then they die off, and new ones keep coming all the time. So the plant is never lacking for blooms. It's always putting blooms on, and the old blooms, if you are neat Nick and want to go in and deadhead, take the old stems off, you can, but usually they just break off, fall off on their own over time. But they keep putting out new leaves. They form like a little mound, and beautiful yellow color, which is again very dominant in the desert climate, and just a great little plant. You can buy it as a 1 gallon plant, or even if you can find a store that'll have them in little 4-inch pots, you can get them started that way. They reseed, they'll spread, so they're great little plants to use. And like I said, they're almost evergreen, so they keep blooming just about year round. Another one that's pretty good to see out in the desert, especially if we've had a little rain and stuff, is Blackfoot daisy, Melopodium. This one is very beautiful, especially when it has this mat of white color with the little yellow button centers on them. They don't get very tall, just a few inches off the ground, but they'll form a mat about 12, 18 inches in diameter. They need just a little bit of moisture to keep them going. If you water them too much, you'll actually drown them out. But very small, little leaf shape to them. Again, adaptation and not using a lot of water, but a very colorful ground cover. So good to use underneath some of the plants or along borders. Desert marigold. This one is one that you'll see growing out on the flats around El Paso. Usually if you have much that has a yellow color, usually it is desert marigold. And when you feel the foliage on it, it's very soft in color, very beautiful yellow color with the silver foliage to it, very velvet-like feel to it. We often call them weak perennials because they'll stay in the same area for 2 or 3 years, and then they tend to die off, but they drop seed and you get new plants coming up. So you always got new desert marigolds coming up, and they'll die back during the year. They'll resprout, kind of rosette out, and you can clip off some of the older foliage and allow the new stuff to come on. So it's a great little plant for the area. It doesn't require a lot of water, just a little bit, enough to keep it alive and keep it going. But again, you'll see it along roadsides, or you go out in the desert, you'll see it along some of the highways, and it's just a great little perennial plant. Agaves. Agaves are a plant that you either like or dislike. It's not a cactus, it's a succulent, and they do have usually some very sharp points on them. You will get punctured, stuck by them, pretty easily. Even if you work around them and you know what you got there, sometimes they'll still get you. But they have a very symmetrical growth habit, depending on the species. And you can see this one has the little black tips on it. This is a Havardiana, one of our native agaves. These plants, as the sun moves and all the leaves are spread out to where they pick up moisture and sunlight. So they bring a lot of moisture into the center of the plant, which goes down to the roots to keep them going. And the new growing tip is the most important part, and that'll be in the center of the plant. So as it grows out, it expands out new leaves, and a lot of times you'll see the patterns on the pads of the leaf that was pressed up against that old leaf, which gives it a very unique look. So again, they're known as century plants because they don't bloom real often. So it seems like it's a century before they bloom, but usually you'll get a bloom within 10 years. And the one thing about agaves, when they bloom, the mother plant dies back. So this pretty plant, if it blooms, it will brown out, die back, and eventually fall over. And you'll get some offshoots, some baby agaves start to come up from the base. So it kind of reseeds itself, keeps it going. But a beautiful plant grown in containers, usually kind of not very deep containers, but pretty wide because the root system's not very deep on it. Prickly pear, a lot of different prickly pears. We were talking a little bit as the meeting was getting ready to start that some of the prickly pears took a little bit of a hit this winter. Last 2-3 weeks we had a cold spell come through, and a lot of the agaves that are not, the prickly pears that are not adapted right to our particular desert climate, come a little bit south of here from Mexico, are thicker padded there, and a lot of those kind of turned yellow. They became very limp and kind of fell down, and the ones, the Engelmanni, the native ones, Macrocenta is our native purple prickly pear, and gives you that nice purple color. Usually the pads aren't as thick as some of the ones that you think about that are used for nopales and stuff, but again, they don't require a lot of rainfall or moisture. They are able to survive under very dry conditions, have beautiful flowers on them. The tunas, the fruits on them are edible. The pads, this one's heavily spined, so you'd have to remove some of the spines off that. That's why some of the Mexican varieties are preferred. They have a lot less spines. Some are spineless, even though you still have the little glochids, but they can be started from breaking the pads off and just planting the pads and reproducing the plants that way. So great plant.
John?
Yes, go ahead.
We have a question. We want to know if you can take a pad and root it, prickly pear.
Yeah, you can break a pad off at one of the joints there, and usually I let the cut area just air dry for a few days, and then go ahead and stick it in the ground, maybe a quarter of the way. You don't have to put it in real deep, but enough to stick it in and just put some soil up around it, and it'll eventually root out and take hold, and then you'll start to see some new little pads developing off of it, so you'll know it's taken. So they're pretty easy to propagate that way. Don't need any rooting hormone, anything like that. They'll root on their own.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Our Ocotillo, very common around our area. Unfortunately, a lot of people have harvested Ocotillos out of the wild around El Paso. So a lot of the native Ocotillos that we used to have all the way around El Paso a lot of them have been taken for use in local landscapes. Some, I'd say, kind of unscrupulous landscape nursery people have dug them out of the desert and resold them, used in people's landscapes and stuff. And so we've lost a lot of the Ocotillos that we've had native, around the area. So if you ever get a chance to look at some of the areas that have more of a native stand of Ocotillos, you can really appreciate the Ocotillo more. And so those are great plants. There's kind of a mystery of what makes them leaf out and bloom at the same time. Sometimes they just leaf out and not bloom. Other times they bloom and there's no leaves, but moisture is one of the big indicators. So when they come out in the spring, usually they are leafed out and will bloom. Great hummingbird plant. And then they will begin to lose some of the leaves as it begins to heat up and things dry down. Sometimes we'll get a little rainfall or something that'll come in, and all of a sudden they'll pop back out with a green color. So, but a great plant, used for fences and different things like that. They can be cut and stuck in the ground. A lot of times they'll reroot when they're stuck in the ground. The worst thing I've seen is where people have gone in and actually pruned them back. I call it butchered, kind of like they do the mulberry trees, and they'll get cut back, and it just ruins the shape on them. So if you're got too many stalks on them, then go ahead and cut them down to the ground. Cut the stalk off at ground level and not whack it off halfway up. And but great plant. We do have several nurseries that are growing seed-grown Ocotillos, and those are, if you're worried about the environment, using a seed-grown Ocotillo would be better than having one that's been dug out of the desert. So again, great plant to use. Okay, we have two plants here. The one in the foreground is Sotol, and we have a lot of Sotol, especially when you're going up Trans Mountain Road. You'll see all the Sotols up on the mountainsides of the Franklins, and we have two Sotols up there. There's kind of a gray one, which is the wheeler eye, and then we have a green one, which is Taxana, and the Sotols are succulents. They're kind of related to the yuccas. They have the leaf blades that come out, and you can see they have all the recurved spines on them. And so most of your Sotol, there's one we'll talk about that doesn't have it, but the rest of them have those recurved spines on them, which, some people say catch trash and, things like that, but they also work as barriers, but they have a very symmetrical growth habit. They do send up a flower stalk, and the flower stalk, the plant does not die once it flowers. So the Sotols will flower, and once the flower stalk dries off, you can cut it off, come down as low as you can into the plant and go ahead and cut the stalk off, and then you can reuse it somewhere in the landscape or throw it away, whatever. But Sotols do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if you look when you're hiking up or driving through Trans Mountain, you'll see some that have more of a grayish green color, and then others that are greener. So the green Sotols are the Texana, and the other ones are the wheeler eye. So they do form a modified trunk. As they get older, they'll develop a little bit more of a trunk. Some people do prune off some of the lower leaf blades and stuff. I caution people to be careful with taking off too many of those, because those, if they're green, they're still attached to the trunk of the Sotol. The same with yucca. The yucca in the background is Yucca torii. That's one of our tree-like yuccas, and those dead hanging down stalks there actually give winter protection, cold protection to the trunk of the yucca. So we're not real big on taking all those off. But if you are kind of a person that's more of a neatnik and want to prune those off, they do in some of the highly maintained landscapes. They will shave those off. And again, I prefer to keep them on and let them hang down, but again, that's a personal preference. But just be cautious about taking too many of those off. So, and especially if they're green, leave them on until they've started brown or yellow, and then you can take them off. So, yuccas, we have the tree-like, the arborescent, the yucca torii. The Faxon yucca is down towards Big Bend. That's one of the larger, Van Horn, Big Bend area. It's one of the larger upright um, yuccas. And then we have the one that's soap tree yucca, which is a thinner bladed yucca. And it is actually the state flower of New Mexico. And that one has rhizomes. So it spreads by rhizomes underground and will form thickets or groves of yucca plants. And they're much harder to transplant because they have the rhizomes, whereas the yucca torii is more like a palm tree and has a base of, of roots around the heavy bottom of the plant. So when you dig it, all the roots are kind of like a palm tree, and they're easier to bring up that way. So, and palms and yuccas are somewhat alike. They both transplant better during the warm parts of the year than the cold parts of the year. So a little bit different there, but they are very, very heavy, very, very hard to transplant and move around. So, okay, a plant that's, I guess a little bit similar to Sotol is Nolina or bear grass. And we have several different Nolina species. This one is Texana. The flower stalks come out of the center of it. Some species will have a little bit taller one. Other ones will stay down a little bit closer to the base of the plant. Those can be removed, or, after they dry, you can cut them out, leave them. But the plant puts out so many of these like grass-like leaf blades that it forms almost like a pampas grass. So it does have a clump of, looks like grass. So it's called bear grass. Nolina, there's several different species. They're evergreen. They do form kind of a clump, very drought tolerant. So great plants to use in the landscape. We have several different ones. And so again, we'll have some to pick from, hopefully at the plant sale, but they can be seen in the Chihuahuan Desert Gardens. The one plant that is most predominant in our desert around El Paso and Las Cruces is creosote. And creosote has a long, long history of an herbal, medicinal properties on it. It's been used in ceremonies and all kinds of different things. The one thing about creosote is very, very drought tolerant, very, very, hardy for our area. It has the little, if you look at the leaves on, they're small in shape. They're kind of wax-like, almost kind of greasy looking. And those all help to reduce the water loss on the plant. So those are great, a great plant to use. I remember growing up as a kid in Las Cruces, there was a family that transplanted creosotes from the desert and planted them along they lived on the corner house, and they planted the corner with creosotes, and they kept them pruned into a hedge, and they had this creosote hedge there for many, many years. And when it rained, of course, it smelled just like the desert. It was great. And so the creosotes, unfortunately, will take a pruning, a shearing, so they can be sheared and pruned back. They are a what we call an invasive species. There is one they've kind of moved their way in and have taken over a lot of our desert because they are so drought tolerant. They will survive where other plants die off. So they are great plants. You can see them out in the desert. They kind of turn brownish, kind of greenish brown in the droughty years. And then when we're getting a lot of rainfall, they're nice and green with the yellow flowers on them. So great plant, evergreen. Again, medicinal properties, been used by Indians and medicine men for a long time for different ailments. Has some potential as a possibly a cancer um, answer to cancer and arthritis and kidney stones, things like that. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies are looking at creosote as a plant that may have some medicinal properties that we'll see in the future. So great plant, very hard to transplant. The nurseries do grow them from seed, and so they are available in nurseries. So a great plant to use.
John,
Yes, go ahead.
got some questions. I have a question. I have creosote in my backyard. It's natural. It was
Yeah.
here when we got it into our house. You can't transplant them, can you?
You can. They're very, very hard to transplant because they are. You're cutting a lot of the root system. Their roots go out, hundreds of feet away from the plant. Well, it's not so deep as it. Well, it's deep, but it's also spread out. So the area between creosote bushes, they have all the roots and they're picking up water from everywhere. So when you actually dig them close, you're only getting 5% of the root system. So they don't survive very well. So
yeah, I've tried it several times and nothing.
Yeah, smaller plants, and believe it or not, Jimmy Tipton, he was a horticulturist out here at the research center, and I believe his doctorate or his master's thesis was on transplanting creosotes, and he found if you give them more water, you actually have a higher survivability when you dig them and give them more water.
Oh, okay.
But they found that they start pretty easily from seed. Those fuzzy little white balls there are the seed on them, and they actually start pretty easy from seed. And again, we're starting to see them in the nursery trade, and if you can buy them that way versus digging them out of the wild, it's better, and you have a plant that has all the roots in the pot, and it's right there ready to go.
Okay, another question is, when is a good time to transplant the creosote bush?
If you're going to try and transplant them, really the best time is in the spring and fall. So again, you want to try and find a smaller plant, get as much of the root as you can, either pre-dig the hole that you're going to move it to, and then keep the plant wet after that. So you'll need to water it every few days to keep the soil wet, and then watch for regrowth on the plant. If it's starting to put new leaves out and stuff, then hopefully it's taking hold. But it does take a three or 4 weeks to really get it going.
Okay. Do you know anywheres where you can buy creosote bushes?
I usually try and bring them into the plant sale. We'll check with Kevin to see if he's able to get any. But Sierra Vista, some of the nurseries carry them in, and but again, we're kind of deficient of native plants in our nurseries in the local area.
That's true.
So when you go to Arizona, you can buy creosotes in the nurseries there in Arizona, but we have a hard time getting them in Las Cruces.
And will those I guess those will work here, if you buy them in Arizona?
Yeah, you can ask what the source is, and if they're a Sonoran source, they probably will have a little bit of, cold winters. You may have a little bit of damage on them, but they'll do pretty well.
Okay. And the last question is, how large does the creosote bush get?
The creosote, most of them in our area are somewhere, like you see out in the desert, about 4 to 5 feet
Right,
tall, sometimes three
right.
feet, depending on depth of soil and stuff like that. But usually you will find them in areas that aren't really sandy. They're more rocky, gravelly type soils.
Oh,
And
that's ours. We live at the base of the mountain, so I guess that's why they like it here.
yeah, so you can kind of look at their native areas where they grow at. When you start
Mhm.
getting sandier, you run into mesquites, which are another invasive plant, but the mesquites take over a lot of the sand dunes, the sandy areas, and the creosotes have kind of more of the gravelly, rocky areas
Right,
coming off the
right.
hills.
Okay, a
But
suggestion is somebody found their creosote at Eastside Discount.
all right, good
Just
source.
gotta
I'm
look
glad
for it.
I'm glad to hear they have it.
Yeah,
But that's
I think they're trying to get in more native stuff.
yeah, that'd be good. They're um,
Right.
creosote, like we said, you can find them from wholesale suppliers, so hopefully they'll
Yeah.
bring them in. If
Right.
you're looking for a certain plant, can find them, let the people know what you're looking for, and that way the demand builds up and they'll
Ah,
start to carry them, hopefully.
okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, one of my favorite plants and probably one of the oldest xeriscape plants is our rain sages, our leucophyllums. And these have been around for a long, long time. If you go over towards the Junction area, Junction, Texas, that's where a lot of the leucophyllums are native to. And when they're getting a little bit of rainfall, the whole area there is just in color with all the creosotes in bloom. And that's how a lot of the hybrids, the crosses and stuff are found. People go out looking and find a creosote of a different color. I mean, a leucophyllum of a different color. So there's about 11 different species of leucophyllum now. So a lot of different colors. You can get the green leaf, the silver leaf, there's a kind of a reddish colored leucophyllum. There's pink ones, there's purple ones, there's blue ones. So a lot of variation, but leucophyllums are um, meant to be about 4 foot by 4 foot, 5 foot by 5 foot. So trying to keep them into little 2 foot balls is really fighting the plant. You're trying to make it do something that it's not really meant to do. And with native plants, we like to keep them low maintenance. So give them the space and let them grow. You can do a little bit of pruning to kind of thicken them up a little bit, but kind of be cautious about doing the heavy shearing on them. But they are beautiful plants and they do bloom when we're starting to get rainfall. They just can pick up on the barometer change and they just know when to bloom. You can go out and hit them with a hose and try and fake them into it, and they just know when the rainfall's in the area, and they'll start to bloom a few days to a week after a rainfall. So great plants are also known as barometer plants. So great plants for the area. Another one plant that I do like a lot is called woolly butterfly bush. It's a Buddleia, so it's in the same genus as the butterfly bush that's sold in nurseries that has the purple and pink spikes on it. But woolly butterfly bush is a native. It's silver in color. If you feel the leaf on it, it's very fuzzy, and that's all the white hairs on the leaf. And its flowers are orange in color and they're ball shaped. So you can see all the little flowers that make up that orange ball. And it's a plant, if you give it too much water, you'll actually rot it out. So it likes just minimal amounts of water and it'll do good. It grows fairly fast. It can be not heavily pruned, but it can be pruned back if it gets a little leggy. But great plant. You can see some examples in different gardens around um, El Paso. We have some at the Chihuahuan Desert Garden, but great plant. Should be able to find it in nurseries and stuff also. But get about 5 feet, roughly 5 by 5 also can be kept a little bit smaller in shape, but basically let them grow out, and if they get too woody, you can cut them back and thicken them up a little bit. But great plants, they are evergreen. Okay, one that you see coming off some of the hills coming off the Franklins is a patchy plume. Usually you see them along some of the arroyos, the waterways coming off the mountains. This is a great plant. You can see why it's called a patchy plume. You can see the plumes all over this plant. It's a member of the rose family. The white flowers on it have 5 petals, and the plumes are what gives it its name, but also its attractiveness is it just covers in these plumes and get this beautiful cover on. It is kind of semi-evergreen pretty much throughout the year. It doesn't have a lot of things that bother it. So if you let it grow, give it lots of room, because it'll get about 4 or 5 feet tall and about 6 to 8 feet wide. And so it will spread out and then drop some seed, and you'll get some volunteers and stuff. But a great plant, again, needs a little bit of water. It grows along arroyos, so it does get the water when we do get some moisture. But great plant. Again, I'd be careful about doing any heavy shearing on it, because you'll just ruin the natural shape and growth habit to the plant. Okay. Mexican redbud. There are several redbuds that grow in El Paso. The Mexican redbud has a little bit more heat tolerance to it. It is a plant that I've seen it out in the wild in the Chihuahuan Desert, growing on some ranches and stuff. It is kind of an understory tree, so a lot of times you find it growing under the shade of a bigger tree that might be nearby. And so this one was out at the A&M Center. Unfortunately, something happened to it, and it got removed, got taken out, and died back. But just like the other redbuds, it springs out into bloom. It's blooming right now around town and puts out the real hot fuchsia pink flowers on it. And then the leaves come on later. So it'll put the blooms out. Blooms will begin to fade, and then the leaves begin to come out on it. And those blooms, a lot of them will turn to little kind of purple seed pods that give it some added interest to it. But the plant is meant to be kind of multi-trunked and not real tall, about 20, 25 feet tall, and about as wide. But a great little accent plant to give you a nice bright spring color to it. So a good plant to use. You can tell you have the Mexican variety by the leaf shape. It will be thickened, kind of a little bit more glossier in look and in feel, and it has a waviness to the leaf on it. So the margins on the leaf are kind of wavy, waxy, kind of toughened, and they're a great plant to use in our area. It is deciduous, by the way. Another one that's gained a lot of popularity in the nursery is desert willow, and our old native desert willow with the pink flowers on it out in the arroyos and stuff around El Paso is our more common desert willow. Produces sometimes a lot of seed on it, which is the little brown kind of pencil-like pods that are on the plant. It is not a willow. It's actually in the catalpa family, and not to be mixed with catalpa, which is related, but not this one. Our desert willows are really the best, and they will get up about 20, 25 feet in height. They can be grown into multi-trunks or single trunk. And right now you have a lot of variation in color on them. So there's a lot of breeding work that's been done on desert willow. And we have ones with dark purple flowers on them. Other ones with purple throats and pink outsides, and pink throats and purple outsides. So, and some of them that are nearly seedless, and others that produce some seeds. So we have a lot of variation in them. So I would recommend finding your tree in bloom so that you know what the bloom looks like, and picking it, if you're interested in bloom, picking it when it is in bloom. Bubba is one of my favorite. It was produced at the San Antonio Botanic Garden in San Antonio, and it has the purplish flowers on it with very little seed and more compact growth habit. We have a big one there at the garden at UTEP, and that is one of the more popular desert willow varieties that are out there, but we do have several of them. So again, get to know them. They are deciduous, so they will drop their leaves. Their blooms are very, visited a lot by hummingbirds and bees and great insect plant. So beautiful, does well in our landscapes and in our conditions here in El Paso. So great plant to use. So strongly recommend it. Okay, Texas honey mesquite. We have two different kinds of mesquites here. We have the Texas honey mesquite, which comes from South Texas, which is Prosopis glandulosa, variety glandulosa. These can get up probably close to 50 feet in height and 50 feet in width. They are the much larger of the mesquite trees that we see in our area. When you look at the two, they do have a little difference in them. There is one variety of Texas honey mesquite called Maverick, which does not have thorns on it, but the rest of them do have thorns. All of them produce seed. Somebody one day is going to produce a seedless one. They're going to make a fortune, but right now they do all produce seed, but they are great plants. Filtered sunlight, you can see the plants growing underneath these mesquites, and give enough sunlight down below that the plants can survive, and they're open enough that you get a little wind blowing through them, and beautiful plants. I love their kind of globular, stance to them, so they're wider than they are tall. Now the western honey mesquite, Prosopis glandulosa variety torii, is the one that we see more out in our area of the woods, and this one gets up about 35 feet tall, so it's not as tall, and you can see it still has quite a bit of width to it, but not as tall, so it's wider than it is tall, and again produces seed and thorns, and but again uses very, very little water. It'll, if you give it a lot, it'll grow even faster, but if you hold back, it'll do fine. So mesquites are plants that will use whatever you give them, and so great plant for the area. Need to be careful on your pruning on those, training, because you can get some limb breakage if you improperly prune them. So great trees for the area. One that a lot of people like, this one's down towards...
John?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Which was the mesquite variety that does not produce thorns?
It's called Maverick.
Maverick. Okay.
And it's as part of the Texas honey mesquite, but you buy it as Maverick.
Okay. Thank you.
So Texas Mountain Laurel, this one's down by L&J Cafe on one of the side streets there. It's one of our only evergreen, broadleaf trees that we have in the Chihuahuan Desert, and beautiful, kind of purplish blue flowers on it in the spring. Just smell like grape bubble gum. Beautiful tree, not super large, about 20-25 feet in height and width, and leaves are very glossy green in color, and beautiful bloom. Bloom is followed by a pod in which a red seed is inside it, you want to be a little cautious because the seed can be noxious to animals and kids. So you want to be careful with those, but it is a beautiful plant. I don't know of any, try and keep track of any kind of health problems that we hear about it, and we just don't run across very many. So, but it is a beautiful tree. It requires a little extra pruning to get it up into a single trunk or up into a multi-trunk, but a great plant to use. We have a fairly old one at the garden there that's about 25 years old. So again, great plant. These usually slow growing. You get them in 5 gallons, but they will do well in the area. Okay, I'll kind of stop there. Here's our scrubby desert there. So, it's not the same as other parts of the state. So we do have a very distinctive desert out here. And it has a lot of variety in it. And if you'll take the time to go on some of the hikes as we celebrate the mountains and different things like that, you'll get to know the area better and some of the plants that grow in it.